but will be the place of choice to work and where officers will have no reservation in declaring, I am a public officer. On behalf of the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, welcome, and we look forward to your support as we seek to build a better public service. Thank you.
Thank you, FS Morrison, and I am sure that by the time we are finished, every public officer will shout and be proud to say, I am a public officer, and the Ministry of Finance will be the place of choice within the public sector for persons to work. I'd like to invite the Cabinet Secretary, Ambassador Douglas Saunders, to give us our opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Maria. I didn't realize that these were supposed to be opening remarks. I think, like everyone else, I'm looking forward to the update and in particular the presentation by the Minister. But Ministers Clark, Williams, our representatives of our international development partners, members of the private sector, and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. Well, now that I've been elevated to opening remarks, it's certainly my pleasure to give these a few brief remarks. But as I said, I'm looking forward to the main presentation and the presentation by the Minister. Like my colleague, Financial Secretary, I have been in the public service for some time. In my case, over 40 years. Various capacities, mostly, of course, as many of you know, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But I have, as a result of that, seen the many efforts over the years, over the decades, at public sector reform, as we used to know it. But that's from the 1970s, in some form or other. But I think it's important to make a distinction between those earlier efforts and the one we are now embarked on. Those previous efforts, unfortunately, happened to be perhaps piecemeal and, in most cases, were the result of solutions and prescriptions coming from outside the country. I think the current phase really is marked by the adoption by the then government under Prime Minister Bruce Golding of the Master Rationalization Plan in 2010. And that framework is, of course, the one that continues to guide these efforts, which have, in a sense, been more recently reinvigorated in more recent years. I'm pleased to see, although I think, like many of us, perhaps we are impatient for faster progress, that, and although 9 years is a long time, we have, I believe, achieved some significant advances and improvements over this period. And perhaps sometimes we need to remind ourselves that, that saying, the race is not for the swift. Sometimes it's better to pause, reflect, and ensure we are taking the correct steps suitable to our requirements and our circumstances. The public sector is, of course, and it goes without saying, staffed by highly skilled, qualified officers, officials. But most of the time, we are perhaps constrained by a lack of the appropriate technological, physical, and other resources and infrastructure. I was reminded of this yesterday. I happened to have to go to, one of Darlene's departments to do some business on a personal level. And the staff was obviously very knowledgeable, very helpful, very pleasant. But you could see where they were constrained by absence of equipment, perhaps even the physical environment not really conducive to orderly and efficient service. But I just want to remind ourselves, I try to do this as often as I can, that the objectives of the exercise, the main objectives, have to do with efficiency and effectiveness of the delivery of public services. And I also need to remind us that we are part of that consuming public. We are clients of the state. We have to do business with the state in various ways. So the fact that we are part of the public sector does not in any way diminish that. And this requires, therefore, some serious rationalization in addition to the technological and other improvements. We often like to make comparisons between ourselves over time, but even in the present day with Singapore. I am told Singapore has, approximately 50 public bodies, Minister. We have over 200, knocking around various state entities. Clearly, that is not an efficient use of resources, and I think it's clear there is room for significant rationalization. There's a lot of overlap, and what has happened over the years, we have created new bodies without taking a look at what existed and what needed perhaps to be dispensed with or upgraded into an institution that can meet the new requirements. I have a slightly, I suppose, selfish outlook on this transformation exercise. You know, I know it is quite common for us to say, you know, we will make sacrifices for our children and future generations. But I think we need to get into the mindset that we are making some of these sacrifices for ourselves now. And if one looks, for example, on the road infrastructure projects taking place, we are, in essence, doing so under some pressures, partly because we are actually looking at loan funds. There are certain conditionalities and time frames associated with that. And that the latter have contributed, I believe, to perhaps the not so careful and thoughtful planning and undertaking the thing. The time constraint is a serious one. And a lot of that could have been avoided. But more importantly, as I said, it's loan funds with which we are doing most of that work. And partly because we haven't ourselves created our own genuine fiscal space to allow for these projects to be funded on our terms and in timely fashion. And of course, again, because of that lack of what I call genuine fiscal space, indigenous, homegrown, that many other requirements and demands in the economy, in the country, are not being adequately resourced. We just don't have it. So I just want to, in closing, just to say that I am quite confident, you know, whether we are looking at future generations, whether we are looking at our own requirements now, that we ourselves will benefit from these, that I'm quite confident that the public sector, members of the public sector, will, Minister, give some heart and enthusiasm to the various activities involved in this process. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Saunders, as eloquent as usual. And you're quite right, the race is not for the swift. And one thing we must remember is that we are, as public officers, delivering services whilst we are transforming the public sector. Because we can't say to the public, wait, let us transform and then let us give you service. We must continue to serve the public, and we must transform. Two imperatives that require balance. We would not be able to do this without support, both technical and financial. And for this, we have to thank our international development partners who have, through the years, stuck with us whilst we work to make the public service a service for all. And in that vein, I'd like to ask Mrs. Therese Turner-Jones, the General Manager for the Caribbean Country Department of the Inter-American Development Bank, to bring us greetings.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Maria. Morning, Minister Clark and Williams, and my colleagues from the other development partners. So when I walked into the office this morning, my staff said, "Why are you dressed in black?" So I said, well, I'm going to a public sector transformation presentation this morning, and this represents the dying of the old and burying of the old public sector in Jamaica, and hopefully moving to a new era of what the public sector should be in Jamaica. I also said, as I was walking out, my husband was like, "So what do you have on your agenda this morning?" I said, "A public sector transformation presentation," and he said, "Remember, public sector transformation can only happen if we want it to happen." And I'm very pleased to be here this morning with you and having heard Darlene announce her vision for what the public sector really ought to be about. But before I go into very brief remarks, I want to read something that's a summary of this book, which if you haven't seen, read, and inwardly digested, I'm suggesting you do. And this is a publication by the IDB on Wait No More, which talks about the state of the public sector in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's not sort of bedtime reading that's going to put you to sleep nicely. You may have nightmares after, but I think there are some gems in here, and it makes us realize why we're here. And this is brief, but here we go. Requesting a birth certificate, registering a property, and paying a traffic ticket are all transactional public services, also known as government transactions. Government transactions connect people to the rights that governments confer and the obligations that they demand. In an ideal world, they would go unnoticed. They would be so easy that no one would have to write a book about them. That is not the reality in Latin America and the Caribbean as we know it. However, government transactions are difficult. They are slow, susceptible to corruption, and disproportionately affect the poor. Given the thousands of transactions that governments require and the millions that citizens and firms complete every year, these difficulties are multiplied. Why are transactions so difficult? The four main reasons are as follows, and this is what I think we're here today to address. Lack of government awareness of the real citizen experience, despite the fact that every person working in a government, himself or herself, has experienced bad government service. High regulatory complexity, scant inter-institutional coordination, silos, we don't speak to each other. No systems that connect each other to supply one set of data. Government distrust of its citizens, public managers' distrust of their counter clerks, and the generalized perception that high barriers to access are needed to protect public services against abuse. Now, I found out, reading this book, that in Jamaica there are 1,385 transactions that any citizen of Jamaica has to deal with the government, almost 1,400. In the Bahamas, 366,000. In Argentina, about 1,500. So Jamaica has roughly the same number of transactions as Argentina, a country of multiple times its population. So those are opportunities for improvement of the citizen experience of what government has to offer. The public sector transformation program in Jamaica has been ongoing for many years. We've been a partner with Jamaica for a long time. There is progress being made. If you look at how Jamaica's improved in the doing business indicators, for example, on opening up a business, that's moving up 7 points on that one metric, puts Jamaica in the top 10 in the world. However, there are many other aspects which we know are left wanting. We produced another publication last year called Nurturing Institutions, which identifies lots of gaps in the way various government institutions work in Jamaica. There is a lot of work to be done, but the work has started, and it's very encouraging to see that it has started. I left Nassau, Bahamas yesterday, where we had the officials from Estonia, the e-governance academy, visiting with the Bahamas authorities for the digital economy agenda. Now, Jamaica was the first country to announce that it wants to become a digital economy in this region. In October of last year, 6 countries accompanied me to Estonia to see what is possible. Estonia is a country of 1.5 million people, pretty much smaller than Jamaica, and we're using that example in the Caribbean to present what is possible. What I want to say is Jamaica has started on a journey that's going to take maybe a long time, but it doesn't have to take as long as it has, and we want to shorten the time it's taking for this to happen. We're very happy to be here to hear about Minister Clark's vision and strategy for moving this forward in the future, and we look forward to putting in place an agenda that can truly revolutionize the way Jamaica public service interacts with its citizens to improve lives. Our view is that it can be done by moving much quicker to a digital economy and putting everything on a digital platform, which means that all parts of the Jamaican government are operating on one platform. One important principle of this would be a Jamaican citizen would have to give up its data only once, as in Estonia. So if you go to the tax office, they know my name because I have a digital signature, I have an ID card, and if I need to connect to a health service, I don't have to give that information twice. This is where we need to be, and I think if we can think about this as a sprint, because a lot of the elements already in place, we can really move this country in a very different direction. I'm wishing you all the luck in the world, and we stand ready to help in any way possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Turner-Jones, for that. And I want to assure you that we are of the same mind as you are. We know it is a long journey, but we also know that there are ways in which we can make that journey shorter. And we'll talk some more about that a little later. I want to invite Ms. Galina Soturova from the World Bank, the country manager for this region, to also bring greetings.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Minister Clark, Minister Williams, ladies and gentlemen. I really want to thank you for this invitation to talk about, to give very brief remarks on why the World Bank is committed to supporting the transformation of Jamaica's public sector. And maybe, to digress a bit, to follow Therese's closed analogy. I also have black, but I have also the bright future. So why does the World Bank support public sector transformation in Jamaica? Institutions matter for economic development. This is neither new nor particularly controversial. And an efficient, right-sized, and very effective public service and public sector is very important, not only in terms of its cost, and Ambassador Saunders, talked about it. It has to be the right size as not to take valuable resources from productive and capital investments that are needed in an economy, but it has to be very effective in the delivery of its mandates and services. Jamaica's Vision 2030 identifies the drivers of economic growth in Jamaica as stable macroeconomy, strong enabling environment, business environment, internationally competitive industries, energy security, modern technology, and strong economic infrastructure. Underpinning these drivers for growth is a public sector that can do, if I summarize, three things. First, to promote productive investments and efficient market exchanges, which requires the maintenance of a modern legal and institutional framework. Second, provide goods and services that are needed for economic progress, but that the market cannot supply efficiently. These are the public goods as infrastructure, basic research, regulations. And third, importantly, foster economic opportunities and provide safety nets for the disadvantaged in society through social programs. The performance of these functions is conditional upon the quality of institutions to deliver on their mandates. And with the support of international development partners, many of whom are here today, Jamaica has been working very hard in the last few years to upgrade outdated systems, to bring Jamaica's legal framework into alignment with international good standards, to divest unproductive assets, and to introduce new ways to deliver services. And such reforms have resulted in critical advances, and Therese was also speaking about that, and Cabinet Secretary was speaking about that. When you look at a global indicator, the worldwide governance indicators, Jamaica scores not that bad. I mean, actually, Jamaica scores higher than the Latin American Caribbean average, and this is good. But Jamaica scores, much below OECD countries. And you say OECD countries are, different sets of countries, much higher growth, income per capita, etc. But this is what Jamaica has to measure up if Jamaica is to really start, fostering and to launch and unleash, growth and prosperity in a really global competitive environment. So there's a lot to be done. The journey has started. There are good advances, and we really look forward to the opportunity today to hear on the recent achievements, and more importantly, on the path forward. And let me finish by saying that we at the World Bank stand ready to continue to support Jamaica through our financial, technical assistance, and advisory services. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sotirova. I am sure the brightness that contrasts with the black is encouraging for us, and also representative of how bright we are here in Jamaica. I wore hot pink this morning to ensure that our future is indeed bright. And to tell us about the work that has gone on so far in public sector transformation, to give us a glimpse of the future, I'm happy to welcome Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clarke, Minister of Finance and the Public Services, to update us. Minister.
Minister Williams, our international partners, Financial Secretary, PRJ Head, members of the public service and the media, good morning. Maria didn't mention that not only did she brighten up the morning with her hot pink, that's what she called it, hot pink dress, but if you look carefully, She also has hot pink glasses on as well. 2 years ago, the most honorable Prime Minister, in an address at Jamaica House, issued a policy statement on public sector transformation that provided much of the long history of public sector reform and modernization in Jamaica, and outlined a plan for public sector transformation going forward, and pledged his support, and that the support would come, from the head of government. And that sent a signal that public sector transformation is crucial. Now, public sector transformation, as Ambassador Douglas Saunders mentioned earlier, has been ongoing. And in many ways, public sector transformation ought to be a permanent feature of life. You might have periods of acceleration, but as society changes, the public sector has to respond and change. And the steady state should be that the public sector is always transforming to ensure that it is not necessary to have these points where you have to have great acceleration that diverts resources from elsewhere. The public sector transformation in Jamaica at this stage is being led by the Transformation Implementation Unit, led by Maria Thompson-Walters. And I just want you to give her a round of applause for the work that she has been doing. It is tough, it is difficult, there are roadblocks in the way from time to time, some of them real, some of them artificial, and change sometimes is hard to effect and hard to come by. But I want Maria to know that she has the support of the Ministry of Finance, she has the support of myself as Minister of Finance, and in the implementation of the policy of the government of Jamaica, she has the support, if I may as well say, of the Prime Minister. The world is changing at a rapid rate, influenced by advances in science and technology, and small countries like Jamaica struggle to keep up with some of those advances. And this is all compounded by the dynamics of the power structure and demographic shifts and so on. And for these reasons, among others, the public sector must always continue to adapt. And in our circumstances, the imperatives we can put into 3 buckets, which are real. And the first bucket is that there is a fiscal imperative for transformation. I don't want it to ever be lost, and we can't shy away from that. There was a time in Jamaica that our compensation and interest costs were higher than tax revenues. Now, clearly, that was an unsustainable position that we found ourselves in. And thankfully, we have turned the ship over a long period of time, and that ratio is coming down steadily each year. Still have a long way to go, but the fiscal imperative is crucial. Only yesterday I was speaking at the University of the West Indies on the importance of research and development for all countries, including developing countries, and the resources that can be allocated to areas such as that and to priority areas to make sure we have good schools in every single neighborhood and good hospitals in every single community or general population area, is if we can create fiscal space. So fiscal efficiency is a key imperative. No less important is the imperative for governance. In a democracy, credibility is the only currency that we have, because governments are not there by force, they're there by the choice of the people. And it is credibility in the governance of the apparatus of the bureaucracy that maintains the currency that keeps a democracy thriving. And so governance that is appropriate is an important driver of transformation activity. And the third is service delivery. As those who have spoken before me have mentioned, being able to deliver services that the government offers in a faster way, in a cheaper way, more efficiently, is a driving imperative and focus. So I have spoken a lot about the imperatives of the Ministry of Finance and economic independence being a primary sort of plank of over which we put policies. And the achievement of economic independence is inextricably linked to a public sector that's innovative, that's proactive, that's productive and responsive. It doesn't wait for things to happen, but has the incentive and the flexibility to proactively anticipate and be ready for what materializes in societies. And countries that have done well economically, it is no surprise that those are countries that continue to improve their bureaucracy. Two great examples in the English-speaking world are New Zealand and the United Kingdom, who are countries that are, and one small, one larger, constantly updating their public sectors and have among the most efficient public sectors in the world. So the vision of our transformation program is for a modern public service that is fair, that values people, and that consistently delivers high-quality service. And this is no easy task. Coordinating the affairs of any modern state is a complex undertaking. Very few private sector entities, come to the scale and scope of the public sector, and in a developing context, it makes it even more challenging. So in our contemplation of the transformation of the public sector at this juncture, we ask three sort of questions. What are the things that government should do and pay for? What are the things that government must pay for but not necessarily do? And what are the things that government should neither do nor pay for? And we look at the existing landscape and we map that landscape into each of those three buckets. So in this regard, we're focused on some key areas of government operation, of outdated operating processes, inadequate use of information communication technology, inefficiencies and waste in operations, high transaction costs and long wait times, and inadequate human resource management practices, and a cumbersome compensation structure. In addressing these, the current design of the public sector transformation program, you can think of it of having 5 pillars. The first pillar is the introduction of shared corporate services, and I'll speak about that in a moment. And the second pillar is modernizing the human resource management of the public sector. The third is the rationalization of public bodies. The fourth is public sector efficiency. This is where the wait times and the turnaround times come in, and the employment of information communication technology. And the fifth is management of the compensation compensation bill. And all of these 5 work together, and in these 5, we have a number of streams of activities that I would like to update you on what we have accomplished to date and give a brief outline or summary of what we plan to do in the next period. First, on shared corporate services. The introduction of shared corporate services in 8 areas of operation will revolutionize the way in which the public sector works and the level of service that the government provides. There are many functions that exist within the public sector where the customers are entities in the public sector themselves that we have to make more efficient for the services to the external customers to be more efficient. And across the public sector, these functions, human resource management, finance and accounting, procurement, asset management, IT services, internal audit, public relations and communications, and legal services. These are replicated across the public sector. So you have many procurement departments. You have many finance and accounting departments. You have HR dotted all around the public sector, and IT services all around the public sector. And what that means is that replication is often inefficient. It would be much better if we can employ technology to have some of these services centralized, where the service is being provided across the public sector. For one, it delivers much more career fulfillment to the professionals who operate in this area, instead of only doing, procurement or HR in a certain department of government. You're now employed with professionals who work in your area, who you can learn from, and you're working across the entire government. Today you're working on energy, tomorrow you're working on labor and social security, and so forth. I want you to just think of, and these are things, by the way, that we are not inventing. These are the kinds of advances that other countries have made in order to improve their efficiency. So when you think about procurement for a moment, to deliver public service, you have to buy lots of things. You have to buy paper, you have to buy ink on which this is written, you have to buy pens, you have to buy lots of things, right? But every single department of government is involved in purchasing paper and purchasing pens. Now, does that, when technology exists, does that make sense for us to have, I'm making a number up here, but 100 people calling into the same suppliers purchasing paper? Doesn't make sense. What other countries have done is, and we had a presentation from the persons in the United Kingdom who did this, and they think that the UK did this in the 2000s. Tells you how close we are. Normally, things that were implemented in countries like Jamaica that other people have done, they did it 50 years ago. Well, we're catching up. They only implemented this, I believe, in 2004 or thereabouts, where for things like pens and things that everybody uses, you can essentially have a centralized procurement unit. And they go and they purchase or they negotiate with the suppliers on a competitive basis. They produce a brochure or a catalog. Think of a catalog that you get for these stores. And the catalog has, if you want these kind of pens, it's that price, these kind of, and departments and across government just draw down as they need. That is what we mean by shared corporate services. And that we can do not just in procurement, we can do it in all the areas that are mentioned here. So we have retained experienced consultants who have worked in this area in many parts of the world, and they have completed the first stage of development of shared services for implementation, and the report is with the Ministry of Finance for consideration, and they have proposed an implementation plan and methodology, as well as an operating model and detailed design. Remember, you have to think about, building, your kind of networking and information technology that you're going to use, the organizational structure within the shared service office, the kind of SLAs that would exist between that shared service office and the ministry's department and agencies and so forth. And we have a detailed business change plan, and very importantly, part of the consultancy gave us a costing for the transition of services to shared corporate services. Now, the more efficient servicing the internal customers of the public sector can become, is the more efficient the public sector can serve the citizens of Jamaica. And that is why this is crucial. We are at an advanced stage with the first of these, HR shared services, and the model is being tested. And we project that in the beginning of the new fiscal year, HR shared services will commence, i.e., we will have a central facility that provides HR across government, beginning with certain ministries, departments, and agencies, and broadening eventually to the entire government. And by the end of 2019-20, we will have commenced 2 other areas of shared services: internal audit and communication, internal audit and PR and communication. And the next step in those is to submit proposals so we can engage consultants who can help us in those 2 areas. So HR is underway and will be done in 1920, and by the end of 1920, we will have started on those other 2. The second area I want to update you on and to provide a direction of the future is public bodies. The categorization of public bodies that I alluded to earlier, what the government should do and pay for, what it should do but not pay for, what it should neither pay nor do, we mapped some of the public bodies against that, and we also, in 2016, the Cabinet approved a definition of what a public body should be, i.e., when is it appropriate to establish a body outside of central government? What are the appropriate reasons? It used to be the case that one of the reasons was just to circumvent the salary structure. That is no longer seen as a good enough reason. Okay? So the idea is that CABSEC, and any ministry comes to you and says they want to set up a new public body, we're going to test it against that policy that we have approved. Because as was mentioned earlier, Jamaica has approximately 190 public bodies, which means 190 annual reports have to go to Cabinet. It means 190 annual reports have to go to the Parliament. The Auditor General has to deal with 190. Well, some of them are externally audited, but most of them are audited by that department, which is why we have a lag in the audit. We have some public bodies haven't been audited for 5 or 6 years. There's no magic, right? It's because we have too many. It doesn't make any sense. So under the rationalization of public bodies, we are seeking to reduce the number of public bodies through merging entities that are similar in function, closing entities that have outlived their useful lives, divesting entities, and very importantly, integrating entities back into the parent ministry, where it is no longer necessary to have a separate body and, set up by statute in law to perform the function. So importantly, the function doesn't go, but the way in which the function is delivered changes. So since the start of the current, let's call it current phase of transformation activities, we have had 6 mergers involving many entities, and I'll list them. We have had the integration of 6 public bodies into parent ministries, and we have had 4 closures of public bodies, meaning we have impacted 20 public bodies. We have merged the Jamaica Foundation for Lifelong Learning with the National Youth Service and the Apprenticeship Board into the Heart Trust NTA. We have merged the Office of the Children's Registry and the Child Development Agency and created a new entity called the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, and that will be done by September of this year. We have merged the Real Estate Board and the Commission of Strata Corporation and the Registrar of Timeshare. We have merged the NLA and LAMP. We have, and those are the mergers. We have closed the closed the Self-Start Fund, and the Micro-Industry Development Agency has been repurposed to carry out those functions. So the functions remain, but we never needed 2 entities to do the same thing. We have closed some companies that had outlived their useful life. The Kingston Waterfront Hotel and the Portmore Commercial Development Limited, which were subsidiaries of the Road Maintenance Fund, was closed and the services reintegrated into the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. The Audit Commission was closed and the services moved into the Ministry of Finance. The Port Authority Management Services was closed and those services moved into the Transport Authority. These have all happened, and these transactions, while have been carried out with little, if any, interruption in the delivery of services. So since that speech of the Prime Minister at the beginning of 2017, this successful action has been taken with 20 public bodies. There's now an accelerated program in place for public bodies, and we intend to take action. And you'll recall I gave the first speech I gave on my appointment as Minister of Finance was to speak about an acceleration in the rationalization of public bodies. And by September of this year, we will have taken action on 18 more public bodies. So we've taken 2 years to do the first 20, and it will be a year to do the next 20. So that is, and some of these, and the process in which these actions are taken, processes, first of all, there's a cabinet approval, the permanent secretaries are engaged and they're on board, the chairman of the entities, the board of the entities, the management and staff of the entities involved. And some of these are already in the public domain, but I want to just remind you of what we intend to get done by September of this year. We intend for the NISOL to be closed because it has legal aid counsel into the Ministry of Justice, and some companies like Montego Bay Beach, which is a subsidiary of the UDC, will be phased out, closed. And there are a number, and these actions are in our agreement with economic reform program with the fund. They're publicly available, but I'm just summarizing some of them here. So there will be, let's repeat, we did 20 over 2 years, and we're acting on 18, essentially, in a year. So we've discussed the shared services, what we're doing, and remember in shared services, HR we've started and are just about to complete, and during the next financial year, we will address PR and communication, as well as audit. As far as public bodies, we've done 20, and by September, we'll take action on another 18. Let's turn my attention to the human resource management component. Now, this is a very important component, and it's easy to overlook it. I don't understand. Public sector transfer, human resource, how does it go together? Well, the public sector is managed, run, led, and its service is delivered by people. If we want those people to be effective, to be motivated, to be incentivized, then we have to pay attention to the management of human resources in the public sector. And so this is a high priority pillar. A lot of the transformation in HR management is taking place through the deployment of a human resource information system called My HR Plus, which allows for the digitization of all HR records. Today, for the 100,000 people in the public sector, let's imagine that, HR records are manual. And just think a moment of the implications of that. It's because HR records are manual, for example, that it takes time for pensions to be processed. Because, and I've spoken about this before, to process the pension of someone who's retired, you have to retrieve the record, and in today's world, a typical person, they would have spent a few years within the public service, maybe in teaching, and then to the Ministry of Youth, and then the Ministry of Agriculture, and then to a public body and then back. And it takes time to get all the documentation, the manual documentation in some file, in some box somewhere, and string it all together, calculate the salaries from each and the length of service and the leave entitlement. And what happens to the public officer? They feel devalued. They feel as if, how could you treat me like this? I'm a year and my pension has been processed. Well, it will remain that way if we continue to do the same things, if we keep these records in a manual way. So the main emphasis of the HR resource transformation effort is to digitize. So all employment records, all payroll records will be digitized and automated. And this will allow for the employment of HR metrics across the public sector. You will be able to have a much more transparent way of evaluation, for example. You will, for the public officer, they will be able to go online and get their pay slips. When a public officer needs to, go to a bank or to do something with a foreign, embassy or proof, you have to go, you write a letter, you wait, the permanent secretary or accounting officer or whoever it is in the ministry department has to produce this stuff for you. You change address. Think of the time involved in updating those records. All of this now will be in your hands as the public officer. You can go online and see your pay slip, see your leave, how much you have left, your leave entitlement. You can go and change your address, update your records. You can enter the modern world. And by doing this, we will be demonstrating to our public service that they are valued and that we need them to be motivated in order to perform their function. And My HR Plus, because it will have the entire employment record, the pension software will be able to plug into and retrieve the data, allowing for a huge acceleration in processing of pension payments. Now, where are we with HR Plus? So far, 12 ministries, departments, and agencies that were manual are now using HR Plus. These are the Office of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet Office, National Housing Trust, the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, Aerotel Limited, the Jamaica Customs Agency, Transport Authority, eGov Limited, the offices of the Services Commission, the Accountant General's Department, Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency, and the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries. So we have done 12, put those records on My HR Plus. And the plan is to have the Jamaica Constabulary Force and the Tax Administration Jamaica onto HR Plus live by March 2019. And the intention is to roll out the system to an additional 16 ministries, departments, and agencies over the next 18 months, beginning in July 2019. And the project team are now assessing which entities want to be in that second phase. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, represents material progress, and we need the support of everyone to ensure that the phase 2 implementation of My HR Plus can be done successfully and done on time. Under the fourth pillar of public sector efficiency and ICT project, and by the way, these projects are being done with the assistance technically and financially of our development partners, the IDB and the World Bank. And without them, if you just give them a round of applause, please. And they have labored with the government of Jamaica over a period of time for us to get where we are, and I know they will be with us for the entirety of the journey. We're very grateful to them for their support. So under the public sector efficiency and ICT project pillar, we are re-engineering processes to achieve greater efficiency in the delivery of public service. It supports the rollout of the information communication technology backbone or network to provide connectivity across all